Well, welcome back to the Pressure Washing Pastor Podcast. I'm your host, Joshua Brown. And today I've got a dear friend that's going to be on the show, and we're going to learn from him what it looks like to be a minister in the marketplace. Over the next several weeks and maybe even a few months, I'm taking a break from helping you grow and scale your business to thinking about the why behind your business. And I want you to think about it like this. Whatever we put into our brains ultimately produces some type of fruit in our lives. And what if we live our entire lives or our entire business for the purpose of making money, creating a reputation for ourselves, buying things, status, and miss in the day-to-day what really matters inside of life? And so I want to encourage you to take some time, go ahead and subscribe to the podcast and commit to changing the way that you think. When Jesus talked about repent for the kingdom of God is near, he was actually saying change the way that you think. The word there is metanoia. And so it is not as so much as confession and atonement, which we thank God for, which we need desperately, but we also have to change the way that we think about who we are, who God is, and why we're here on planet Earth. And over the next several weeks, you're going to be challenged to rethink why you do what you do. Are you bearing fruit with your life? Is your fruit hanging from other people's trees? Because whether you like it or not, it is. And are those fruits going to endure for eternity? And with no further ado, I'm going to welcome my friend, Brian Minninger. Greetings, my friend.
Hey, Josh. Good to see you, man.
Did I jack up your name or did I say it properly?
You got it right. Doesn't happen very often. Well done.
It's kind of like Greek or Hebrew. If you say it fast enough, nobody really knows if you said it right or wrong. So I just rolled in there.
Yep.
Thank you and welcome to the show. And the first question I have for you is always the most difficult. It's, who is Brian Minninger?
Well, so through the years, I know we're going to talk about purpose. So I've come to describe myself as a builder. And so it is sort of pragmatic, but that's kind of how God created and wired me. And, through the years, I love building things. And I've done that as a carpenter. I've done that with companies, with teams, with building up people. But yeah, the best way to describe me is as a builder. I love just taking raw materials, putting them together, creating something, making something, and that plays out in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, I love that term. Now, catch us up on your stage of life. Wife, kids, grandkids, anything?
Yeah, no grandkids yet. I just turned 48, so yeah, I'm closing in on 50. Victoria and I have been married 27 years. We have 4 grown daughters and 2 son-in-laws. Our girls are pretty close together, and I had identical twins there in the middle. So anyway, but yeah, we're kind of at that stage of life. My youngest is a junior in college, and so for most of the time, we're empty nest at this stage of life.
Yeah, which is why you have the ability to open up into a passion, and I would say almost career at placing third place in your last ultra marathon, would we call it? What an endurance type race? Would you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, so a number of years ago, I started running in kind of an effort to get in shape and to kind of deal with the fact that I had really neglected this temple that God's given us, and it was time for a change. And so that's led me on a journey over the last 10 years that I found a love for running, and particularly running long distances in the woods. And so, and because my strengths are very low on consistency and very high on competitiveness, if you've ever taken a strength finders test, the way I keep myself going and keep doing it is by signing up for races. I don't have the regular habits. I run at all different times of the day, all different distances and paces and so forth. But signing up for races kind of keeps me going, keeps me having fun. And I just love challenging myself through endurance racing. So yeah, and my last race was a 48-hour event where we did a lap repeatedly, and then we placed based on mileage. And I did 118 miles officially in 48 hours and placed third. So
Wow.
45 miles of that was slopping in the mud when it rained and destroyed the trail. So th- uh, I, I realized that, I'm not the fastest, but I can be pretty stubborn. And so when the conditions got bad, it kind of played to my strengths. And so when a lot of people bailed and didn't keep going, I did. So anyway, but yeah, that's that side of things. And yes, it works because my kids are out of the house and I've got time. So
You're a builder, father of 4 girls, ultra marathon runner. You've got a lot of good things going on for you. And what I want to do is I want to step back and jump into maybe the early years and just think about what life looked like before Christ. And so a lot of times if we were to take your life and put it, on a timeline, we can kind of see ups and downs inside of our story. Some of us have crazy past and some of us not so much. What does your past look like up to coming to know Jesus?
yeah, and so I gave my life to Jesus in middle school, and if you remember, for those of us that have been middle schoolers once upon a time, it's a tough season of life. And but I grew up, in a Christian family with and in the church. Um, but as I got into middle school and stuff, we didn't we weren't poor, but we didn't have a lot of money. I didn't have all the right clothes or the right shoes at that point in time. They were, Reebok high tops. I remember those were the things, and I didn't have all those things and so forth. And I wasn't at the time probably all that great at connecting socially. I played baseball, and that was kind of my solace. But for the most part, I really just felt like a misfit. And I had basically one friend, and I think that's the truth. Like I had one close friend at school and another close friend at church. And so I just didn't feel very good about myself. In full disclosure, I felt pretty worthless because I wasn't one of the popular kids. I didn't fit in, so forth. I was kind of on the outside of a lot of stuff. And so that was kind of my backstory, as I'm kind of going through that season.
Yeah. And so how did you come to know Christ? So you're in middle school. Is that when you come to receive him? Who led you to the Lord? What did that look like? Hey, I'm going to interrupt for a second because we've got a phenomenal opportunity for you. If you've been thinking about opening your own pressure washing company, I'd like to invite you to a free webinar. There we'll talk about the pros and cons of opening a pressure washing, and you'll get to chat with our team about whether or not you should launch a pressure washing company in your city or not. To register for this free event, go to pressurewashingpastor.com, scroll down to the little registration button, it's blue, and click on it, and we'll take care of the rest. I look forward to seeing you there. Have a great day. Now back to our show.
Yeah, so there was a Christian camp that I went to almost every summer growing up. And so at that camp, one of the things we did, most evenings was we had firesides. And so we'd sing some silly songs, maybe sing some worship songs. We'd have a speaker. And I'll never forget it. I remember being there one night, and the speaker basically challenged us. And he said, you're not a Christian just because your parents are, or just because you go to church, or you've come to this camp. You need to decide for yourself whether you want to follow Jesus or not. And he gave us the invitation to come drive a nail in a cross, which I think is pretty cool because as I've told you, God's led me on a journey of showing me my creative juices, driving a lot of nails. But I remember what I told God that night. I'm like, God, I don't think much of this life or my life. I don't feel like my life is worth a whole lot, but if you can use it, it's yours. And I remember that I was the first one there to drive that nail in that cross that night. And it started a journey of surrender and pursuit that goes on to this day. I'm definitely not arrived, and that was a pivot point, but it wasn't the beginning and it wasn't the end either. And so but I'm grateful for God's mercy in drawing me in.
And you're still driving nails. I love to hear that. Seems like there's a little pattern that's taken place inside of your life. And as you transition from that church camp into, did you go to college, I assume?
Sort of. So for a long period of time. So anyway, yeah, I, coming out of high school, I really felt a strong, call to the ministry. And my only framework for that was both my grandfathers were local church pastors. That was the only real framework I had for that. I'd spent a little time on the mission field, kind of in the summer after I graduated high school, and then I took a gap year working for Habitat for Humanity for a year in kind of a voluntary service program. And so, I thought I was kind of headed on a pastoral ministry track, and so I started at Liberty University to go that direction. After a year, or in that first year, decided that I wanted to get married, and we were getting married after our freshman year. We were intending to go back to school, but the church we were a part of also had a small Bible college, and so we decided to stay, and it allowed me to work and go to Bible college, which was going to work a whole lot easier than going back to the big university. And so then I took Bible college classes over about a 6-year span, and at some level got my, Bible certificate at some point in that journey. But I took classes at night for about 6 or 7 years.
So did you end up becoming a pastor?
Yes, and that was kind of a journey too. So the whole time I was working as a carpenter, and basically because I needed to provide for my family. And for a lot of years, I did not view my trade as anything more than just a means to an end. It was the way I paid the bills. It was the way I put food on the table, and then I could go do ministry. And so we did youth ministry. We were youth pastors, Victoria and I, for a while. And then we had those 4 girls close together. And so I had to kind of take a break for a while because just did not have the time capacity. And then God and in that journey, we started a construction company. And the interesting thing about that is the guy that I was working for was getting close to retiring. And I started feeling like, hey, I want to start a construction company. And I remember going and talking to my pastor, and I was like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, I know what's involved a little bit in starting a construction company. And I feel like I'm called to be a pastor, and this just doesn't make any sense. And he basically told me some version of like, well, if that's what God's calling you to do, then just do it and don't worry about it. It'll work itself out. And I'm like, okay, well, I was young at the time. It was simple enough for me. So, that's what I did. And in that journey, kind of found a real love for business. And so, and some gifting there. And we grew that company fairly fast, and had got to where I had some flexibility and so forth. And I felt God kind of stirring that I needed to do more in ministry. And once again, I kind of had one framework for it. And so I took a bivocational church planting lead pastor role with our congregation, planning a new church in a neighboring community, and started down that path. And then the Great Recession happened, and I was in the construction industry, and our business did not make it through the winter of 08-09, and things got pretty topsy-turvy for a number of years. But I ended up going to work for someone else and was kind of continued bivocational for about 5 or 6 years. But in that process, I don't do two things very well. Like, I don't do things part way very well. Let's just put it that way. So that became bivocational was a bad idea for me. I just burned myself and the family candle at both ends way too much. Got to a point where I resigned from both positions, actually. And I remember telling God, you need to bring this together for me. I know you've called me to ministry. I know you've given me a gift for and a passion and a calling in business. and I can't do two things. You're going to have to somehow put this together for me. I have no idea what it looks like, and so forth. And so that was 2015, and it's been kind of a journey since, as God has kind of maneuvered the path to where I am today. Running a construction company and fully seeing this as my ministry. And kind of God gave me a picture recently of that. This company is a community that He's given me to steward, and I think that just for me was a very helpful framework as to what this looks like for me. Obviously it has to be economically viable or the community fails to exist, and it's not necessarily a church, but I certainly have ministry within it. But it is definitely a community, and that community in construction, that includes a lot of people. Like, it's not, we have team members, we have subcontractors, we have vendors, we have delivery drivers, we have clients, we interact with a lot of people. That's a very far-reaching community, and so it's kind of what I pastor today.
Yeah, let me go into, back when you were going to college, you met a woman, you end up getting married. When you made the decision to say, hey, I don't know if I want to go full-time vocationally inside of me. When I use the word vocationally, I'm trying to think of all the frameworks of those who might listen. We have younger audiences, we have middle, and I'm thinking, what emotions were you feeling as far as like the desire to be a pastor, but not exactly certain? Do you remember the mixed emotions that you were maybe toying with? Or at least what I hear you saying is you felt a tug to business, and then you also felt somewhat of a calling, or at least something that led you to the decision of having a conversation with your pastor. But prior to having the conversation, I'm assuming you had a lot of contemplation and internal conflict within you. If there's somebody that's watching or listening and they're young and they're in the same boat you're in, maybe even Liberty University, and like they feel like they're supposed to do ministry some sort, and the only framework that they have is pastoring, can you help work them out of and into the framework that you've worked yourself into by 2015, 2016?
Yeah. The funny thing is that I really didn't have questions. I was 100% certain that God had called me to full-time vocational ministry.
Okay,
That's what I thought. And I was pursuing that. I was on that track. Anybody that would have asked me, I would have not told them I was a carpenter or a builder. I told them I was going to be a pastor. And so even though the road was not there yet, so to speak, that's where I always thought I would, quote unquote, end up. And that's where I thought I was going. And I was structuring my decisions and so forth. That's where the question to my pastor came from, because it really didn't make sense to me that I had this idea to start a construction company. Like, it really didn't, I couldn't even figure out where it was coming from. Like, and it certainly didn't feel like it was God at that time. It was more just like, hey, I'd kind of like to do this. And I think what it was the way God created me and gifted me starting to kind of bubble to the surface, but I wasn't paying it any attention or any mind. And obviously, I'm 48 years old. So this was close to 30, 25, 30 years ago. And we didn't talk about marketplace ministry and, workplace ministers or businesses mission. Like, we weren't having those conversations in my church at that point in time. Like, it was like, hey, if you're sold out for Jesus, then you go be a missionary, you go on a mission field, you give up everything, you live as a pauper, and you just surrender it all for Jesus. Like, that's the mindset. And even as I was a youth pastor, this is what I was preaching and sharing and calling the kids to, and, in some ways today, I almost feel guilty about it, because I feel like it was well intentioned, but it was a little misguided, and it was it came from some limited understanding of how holistic and how big our God is. Like, man, I thought it was big God because we were quote unquote dreaming big, but we were putting God in a really narrow box, so.
When I first started my own pressure washing business, I did not know what soft washing was, nor did I know marketing, sales, or even how to manage my finances.
Take the guesswork out of it. We have taken all of the knowledge we've gotten and wrapped it into video courses. It's a 7-figure blueprint for a pressure washing company that you can get at pressurewashingpastor.com. Go there, scroll down to video courses, and purchase it. We guarantee you'll get the value or your money back.
So go ahead and click pause, head over to the website. Now, unclick pause and back to your show. Yeah, our thoughts are so powerful. And when we believe something, we really believe something, and we end up teaching that something. I was the youth pastor that taught Joshua Harris's book, I Kissed Dating Goodbye.
Oh, same here.
And
Same.
I probably was a little bit over the top. There might be another way to go that's not so rigid. And then like you follow people that you love and admire, whether it's Voddie Baucham or Paul Washer. Like I love theology. I love preaching. I love teaching, from Piper to Keller to Chandler to even Driscoll. Now that he's even still trying to, I don't know what, but it's like, we are so influenced by those who influence us that we really believe what we believe. And this idea that you can be a pastor outside of the pulpit is like a lot of work to cognitively get past, unless you spend time with people that pastor their business like maybe Jesus would pastor his business if he had one, or if we looked at Paul and tent making and the New Testament church, it looked like everybody had a side hustle. But thank you for sharing that. I feel like that's one of the things that if anybody that's listening to this podcast or has a friend that's thinking about going into ministry, how many kids have graduated from Liberty and all these other Christian schools with $100-something thousand worth of debt, felt a calling to be a pastor, and then the vocational track didn't work out. And it's like, what if they knew that they could also be a business owner and fulfill that calling? Mm-hmm. When you use the word calling, and I don't want to lead you in this question, but it's an honest question that I'm just saying, when you hear the word calling, is there any definition that you would put behind that? Because I'll chat with people that don't feel called to be homeschool moms. They don't feel called to work the nursery. They don't feel called to give. They don't feel called. And it's like, we almost use this word calling to trump any cognitive processing, to maybe look into it and say like, hey, is there something more than the word calling? Does what I'm asking even make sense right now?
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you some of my thoughts. So personally, I think our calling is pretty broad and it's pretty clear in Scripture. When God created us in the garden, he said that we were to fill, rule, and reign with him. And that in the New Testament, Jesus took it, kind of a step further with the Great Commission and called us, into the work of discipleship and restoration of men. But I think it's pretty broad. What I do think God does, though, is he gives us assignments. And I think assignments change. I think assignments are unique to us. I think they're also unique to seasons. So my assignment today is different than the assignment when I had 4 girls, living at home, but I also now, I see one of my assignments is like, I'm preparing the generations today. Like my kids are forming new families, and they're going to be passing on. And so I kind of see myself a little more as a patriarch rather than a father today, and so assignments are shifting. So, and then the second thing that I'll say about this whole subject is, and I believe this, but somebody kind of put it real clear for me recently, and it just really helped me, is that if we think that the world revolves around us, so to speak. Like if it's all about us, then what we do with purpose is we try to form the world to fit our mind and what we want,
Mm.
you know. But if this is my Father's world and this is his creation and he created me for his purposes and his plan that has been marching from the beginning of the ages to the end of the ages, which is eternity, which I can't even comprehend, then finding my purpose and calling is all about discovery. You know, in Ephesians, Paul tells us that we are his handiwork, created in him to do good work. And I can unpack this work verse, this work word a little bit too, but he created us for a specific purpose and for specific work. And so therefore, the greatest satisfaction and the greatest fulfillment is when we align with him and surrender, not when we kind of like pick our path. You know, it's why I think when we tell our kids you can be anything you want to be, we are doing them a disservice. You cannot be anything you want to be. You can be everything that God created you to be, you know, but you know, just because you want to be a rock star, if he didn't give you a voice, then that's not your path. And unfortunately, you know, there's a measure of surrender that goes in that. But I guarantee you there's something that he's gifted you for, that he's given you a passion for, that brings fulfillment and brings life, because he's a good father, you know. And, you know, when I'm a builder, when I create something, it has a purpose. And I create it for that purpose. Like just recently, we created an outdoor dining space for a local coffee shop. You know, so we created it for a purpose. The best use of it, and you know, is if it's used for that purpose. If you use it for something else, it's not going to fit. We are the same way. God created us for a purpose. If we surrender to that and align to that, then we find those assignments, and it's really a process of discovery. And so I think a lot of times we get just too hung up on this calling thing because we're like, what is it? I don't want to miss it. I'm like, just look at how God made you. Talk to your friends, talk to wise counsel in your life. Look at what you love to do. Look at what you're good at. Like, you know, it says he knew us from before creation. He knit us together in our mother's womb. Like he knows, he created you. So, and in my case, you know, like the example of like, I tried to avoid being a carpenter and tried to, you know, avoid quote unquote being in business. And God's purposes are bigger than mine. They're bigger than my screw ups. They're bigger than my mistakes. And he led that journey anyway. So that's the final thing maybe I'll say is that just, man, don't stress it. Like, don't worry so much about what your calling or your assignment is. You know, there's a lot of callings that are real clear in the Bible, and one of them is obeying what Jesus told us to do. And so just get after it, like faithful servant, obeying what he's called you to do. You know, the rest of it will come clear.
If you didn't know by now, we have created the #1 video courses on starting and scaling a pressure washing company on the market.
That's right. But head knowledge will only take you so far. You need the hands-on experience.
So what we crafted for you guys is an Experience Nashville 3-day boot camp. 2 days in the field, learning everything as it relates to pressure and soft washing and how the systems work, and 1 full day of breakout sessions with Joshua and myself. Visit pressurewashingpastor.com, scroll down till you see a link to my calendar. We will grab a call together and figure out how to get you here to Nashville.
And then we will see you in Nashville.
Back to the show.
I love that. I think you're the first person I've heard use the word assignment. And that does a lot of good for my head, because I'm like, why in the world did I spend 6 months here or 2 years there? And when you look at what you connected as a calling, and then it doesn't work out the way that you thought it was going to work out, you somewhat look at yourself as though you're a failure. And then you have identity issues or a crisis. And if you can step back and realign or rechange the way that you think and say, you know what, it was an assignment, not necessarily a calling. And I don't understand. I took a job, and in week 2, the pastor told me that he has accepted a job in Medford, Oregon. and I was working in Peoria, Illinois. I moved my family from Orlando, Florida to Peoria, Illinois. And if we have Peoria listeners, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, but it sure gets cold a lot. And then week 2, the guy who hired me tells me he's going to leave. When you go through that, you're like, was this an accident? Did I make a bad decision? Was this part of God's plan? And you don't really know how to process it, and you really struggle. I mean, at least I did. And I would say it took 3 or 4 years for me to look back on it and say it was okay. It was part of the assignment. It got me to where I'm supposed to be today. But in the midst of it, it sure did cause a lot of pain, and identity issues.
Yeah, I mean, God is bigger than our mistakes. Like, his purposes don't get derailed because we screw up. I mean, you go through the Old Testament and you see God's purposes being fulfilled in people that were godless and wanted nothing to do with him, whether it was Nebuchadnezzar or Pharaoh or whoever. Like, if God can work in people that are anti him, he sure can handle like our mistakes or misroutes or whatever. Like, I remember, like, you kind of what you were saying there, it made me think about when it became clear to me that I was in the marketplace. I remember asking God, like, well, why'd you have me spend like 6 or 7 years in Bible college? And I sat on that for a little bit. And what I sensed he kind of said to my spirit is like, well, do we really need business owners who are any less Bible trained than we need worship pastors or youth pastors or whatever? Like, isn't it just as important for our entrepreneurs to know the word really well as it is any of those other positions and roles? And I'm like, okay, God, I hear you. You're like, all right, I get it. But honest truth is if I had thought from the beginning that I was going on a business track, I probably would not have gone to Bible college. I would have gone and gotten an MBA or something like that. And, God needed a different preparation track for me. And he orchestrated that through some of my misunderstandings.
Thank you. You've ministered to me just now. So thank you so much for speaking truth. Because when I look back, I'm like, man, I wish, when I was 19 and I went and gave the pastor my pot and God my heart, I wish the pastor would have not sent me to Bible school. I wish I would have been discipled by a loving dude, showed me how to stop looking at porn, start, learning what it looks like to be a godly man, stop smoking weed, and maybe start the business journey. But it's like the journey has created a greater narrative. My daughter, I've got a daughter I'm picking up from college this week. You've gone through this, so you've already cried and done different emotions or whatever, but I'm picking up my oldest daughter from college. She graduates from Lee University, and in 30 days from today, I'll be giving her away to a dude, my first one. And she has a worship trajectory. She would have never entered into this thing called worship if I wasn't a student pastor here at Goodlettsville, right outside of Nashville. And so thank you for ministering to me, because sometimes I get frustrated over the path. I wish someone would have lovingly came alongside of me and said, hey, you don't just have to be a pastor. You can also be a preacher who grows a business, or you can shepherd and also do other things outside of just, saying, hey, this is the only direction that's meant for you. Brian, we've chatted for about 30 minutes, and I've got a question that I want to get to. It's usually the last question that I ask. And here's the question is, if you could only share one thing with somebody before you left planet Earth, it's kind of like if you were doing your own eulogy, what one message would you want to leave behind before you left this planet?
That's a tough one. But I think the place my heart and my mind goes is that there's no greater place to be than fully surrendered to Jesus. And I say that almost with hesitation, because do any of us even know what fully surrendered looks like? It's kind of like, do I love my wife? Yes, I love my wife. Tomorrow I'll look back at today and be like, you didn't love your wife. You love And I think the same thing is true with surrender to Jesus. Like, I thought I was surrendered to Jesus yesterday, but today, looking at that, I'm like, nah, probably not so much. More surrendered today. And so, but Jesus said pretty simply, that if we seek first him and his kingdom, all the other stuff be taken care of, and that's my layman's carpenter interpretation of that verse. And yet I've spent so much of my life, trying to fix or take care of other things. And I've just found, nothing but frustration and discouragement. Look, to give a little bit of perspective on me, I am a high D on the disc. I'm a type A personality. I'm an 8 challenger on the Enneagram. Like, I'm a visionary. Like, I'm a go after it. I have my plans. I have my purposes. I have my goals. I don't like to be deterred, and God created all that in me. But if I'm the center of it rather than him, I lose something. And so the greatest peace and the greatest satisfaction comes in life when we just say, okay, Jesus, whatever it is, whatever you've created in me to do, I'm doing it with you, and I'm doing it surrendered to you. You tell me which direction to go and I'll step, and you tell me when to stop and I'll stop. And so yeah, we could pursue a lot of other things in our businesses. We can try to do a lot of things, but what if God is saying, hold right here, this is it. This is what I want to do. Or maybe God is saying, hey, now it's time to move. Now it's time to grow. Now it's time to wait. I've spent a lot of my life not approaching those kinds of decisions with where is God working and what is he doing and where should I follow him. I've been like, okay, I'm at point A, so I can see point B, so now I'm going there, and this is my path and this is my goal. So trying to lean into surrender in every step of it.
What are 3 practical ways that someone can practice surrendering to God today?
Be still. Our culture just does not know it, doesn't understand it, doesn't do it. It may sound really superficial, but the biggest reason we don't pray is this device right here. It's not because we need another sermon on why we should pray, or we need more willpower or whatever. We are distracted by our devices and we have no time to pray. And so if you're going to live and surrender to Jesus, you've got to spend time with him. And God challenged me a few weeks ago, or actually it's been almost 2 months now, about taking the sports apps off my phone. I don't really spend much time on social media. I didn't necessarily think it was a problem until I took them off. And then I realized, oh my word, look at how much time I have to read my Bible and to pray and to just sit in stillness on the porch and listen to Jesus when I'm not thumbing through this phone. So it's probably the first most practical thing I'd say. Second is lean into relationships. Get some people around you that are strong enough to confront you, to challenge you, to listen, and it in our culture, once again, we're so independent, we're so busy that we fail in this a lot of times. And so you just got to keep showing up, and you got to keep leaning in and into relationships, but they'll form over time. So that's probably the second thing. One is you got to create space for him. 2, you gotta have some close people on the journey with you. Third is it just ain't all about you. And you've got to remind yourself of that every day. Surrender doesn't happen if we think we're the center of the universe. And so I don't know if we have to put it on our mirrors or put it on, brand it on our foreheads, or tattoo it on our arms, but some version of, it's not about me, it's about him. And so if you can find a way that fits for you to just remind yourself of that each and every day, it helps with surrender.
Thank you for coming up with 3. We didn't discuss that ahead of time, but I just wanted to see what 3 that you.
I might get another 3 if you ask me on another time, but those are the best I got right now.
Give me 25 ways that we can become more like Jesus. Just fill the entire thing up.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for being a guest today. It's been a pleasure. I feel like you've ministered to me. I know that you're going to I felt like you were a pastor today preaching the gospel on a conversation, about you being a builder. And so I want to see more kids go to Liberty and then leave to start a business to end up being business on a mission preachers. And so I love it. But anyway, thank you so much again. We'll see you in the future.
All right. Thanks, Josh.
Peace.